Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, February 2nd, 2026. I'm Gary Staroff. Thank you for joining us. It is day 3 of the partial government shutdown as lawmakers return to Capitol Hill today in hopes of making this current lapse a brief one. While this shutdown packs a much smaller punch compared to last year's, it's still affecting important services like air traffic controllers and the IRS. Now, to reopen everything, the House needs to pass a Senate-approved package that will fund multiple government agencies till the end of September. But before that package can go to the House floor, it needs to be heard by the House Rules Committee. They are considering it this afternoon, along with a Republican effort to hold former President Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in contempt of Congress for refusing to comply with a congressional subpoena related to the investigation of convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. We'll hear what members have to say about all of this, plus perspective on the situation in Minneapolis, a new Trump administration health initiative, and the president's plan for a memorial arch over the Potomac River, and a major project at the Kennedy Center. Now, this Senate-passed funding package that's before the Rules Committee includes full-year funding for the Departments of Defense, Education, Health and Human Services, Housing, State, Transportation, and Treasury. The package will also cover funding for the Homeland Security Department for an additional 2 weeks. The Rules Committee gavelled in just after 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Here's Chair Virginia Foxx.
Regarding the unfortunate incidents that took place in Minneapolis recently, let me just say that violence of any kind is deeply abhorrent to me, and any death that occurs leaves a deep impression on our hearts. One can agree with that sentiment regardless where you stand on the political spectrum. Right now, people have a lot of very strong feelings, and it's my hope that the palpable tension within the nation's public squares will be calmed and that we can be models for that. These are deeply concerning incidents that are worthy of an independent investigation in addition to the ongoing investigation by the administration. Next, a word about the appropriations measure before us. The House passed its last tranche of appropriations bills and sent them to the legislative body that sits opposite us. And to the surprise of absolutely no one, the Senate decided in turn to engage in a game of legislative hot potato. The House did not, for even a moment during the appropriations process, flirt with the possibility of a government shutdown. But that's what the Senate decided to do. Now we're back here caught in a malaise of deja vu because, quote, the world's greatest deliberative body, end quote, decided to torpedo the process without fail, as it tends to do. To describe this as disappointing would be an understatement. This process should have been over and done with by now. There's much more business that we need to attend to, and a delay like this keeps us from completing more work.
House Rules Chair Virginia Foxx. Here's Ranking Member Jim McGovern.
Let me first address the government funding package, which was added to our agenda over the weekend. And let me be crystal clear. I will be voting no on this funding package. I refuse to send another cent to Stephen Miller or Kristi Noem. They are undermining our Constitution, and the department they run is murdering American citizens in the streets. She ought to be impeached, and he ought to be fired. I think their words and actions are disgusting. I just checked social media. Neither one of them has retracted or apologized for smearing Alex Preddy or slandering him as a domestic terrorist or an assassin there to massacre law enforcement. Those were lies, lies that were whipped up and spread by people in positions of authority who immediately sought to exploit the murder of a federal employee for their own partisan politics. And I refuse to fund such a lawless, out-of-control agency. I will not vote for business as usual while mass agents break into people's homes without a judicial warrant in violation of the Fourth Amendment. Just last week, a United States District Court judge said that ICE, and I quote, likely violated more court orders in January 2026 than some federal agencies have violated in their entire existence, end quote. That is inexcusable. And I have heard the argument that ICE already has plenty of money. Why not just vote for a 2-week CR? Well, I'm not voting to fund this agency for 2 seconds, let alone 2 weeks. They are terrorizing our communities and acting like they're above the law. That is my red line, and I think it should be the red line for all of us. And by the way, I also don't support the massive glut of unlimited military funding in the rest of the package either. Why on earth are we giving more to the so-called Department of War when the so-called President of Peace is threatening to use money that we're appropriating to invade allies, bomb Venezuela, and break the law?
Rules Ranking Member Jim McGovern. Now, as of this afternoon, the House still could vote on the funding package as soon as tomorrow. Here's what Speaker Mike Johnson said to MS Now's Michael Schnell at the Capitol just a short time ago.
Are you confident you'll be able to get the funding package passed this week?
Yeah, I am. I think we'll get it done by tomorrow.
You think you'll be able to adopt a rule? There are some conservatives saying they want the SAVE Act. They're not happy about it.
We all want the SAVE Act, but we also look at the reality of the numbers here, and we passed the SAVE Act twice in the House. We'll pass it again. We'll do that, but this is a funding package right now, and I don't think we need to be playing games with government funding. We still have winter storms. We got FEMA and TSA and troop pay and everything else wrapped into this, so we've got to get the job done. Republicans are serious about governing, and we'll demonstrate that. And we'll push forward our priorities on the integrity of elections. So we can do all that simultaneously, and we will, but we're going to get this job done, get the government reopened. Democrats are going to play games, and the American people can see who really cares about getting the job done.
Are you asking President Trump to call some of those conservatives who have concerns?
No.
And Speaker Johnson's Republican majority narrowed even further today. That's because Democrat Christian Menefee, who won a Houston area special election runoff over the weekend, will be sworn into office today. He replaces the late Democratic Representative Sylvester Turner, who died in March of 2025, and it leaves the Republicans with a one-seat majority. And we heard Speaker Johnson mention the SAVE Act. Politico's Meredith Lee Hill is reporting that Speaker Johnson met with Rules Committee Republicans shortly before today's hearing. That, according to three people granted anonymity to discuss the private plans. Meredith Lee Hill writes, the meeting is expected to include a discussion of how to handle conservative hardliners' demands to attach a partisan elections bill to the $1.2 trillion spending package. That bill is known as the SAVE Act, but any change to the bill could add more days to the three-day partial government shutdown that Johnson is hoping to end Tuesday with House approval of the Senate-passed legislation. Meredith Lee Hill goes on to write, Florida Republican Representative Anna Paulina Luna is vowing to block any move to tee up the Senate-approved package for a final vote unless Johnson moves to attach the SAVE Act to the bill. With a razor-thin majority, Johnson can afford no more than one Republican defection on a party-line vote. But he got a helping hand today from the president, who posted on social media that he wanted the bill, quote, through the House and to my desk, where I will sign it into law immediately. There can be no changes at this time. We will work together in good faith to address the issues that have been raised, but we cannot have another long, pointless, destructive government shutdown. That all reporting from Politico's Meredith Lee Hill. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries spoke to reporters today. He was asked if any Democrats would help Republicans pass this government funding package.
Republicans have a responsibility to move the rule, which, by the way, includes a wide variety of other issues that we strongly disagree with, including their efforts to weaponize the criminal contempt process so they can create a distraction from the Department of Justice continuing to hide the Epstein files. And so it's hard to imagine a scenario where Democrats are going to provide Republicans who spent all last year lecturing us about the fact that they had some big, massive mandate. Really? You had a 3-seat majority that, as of this evening, will be a 2-seat majority, the narrowest one since 1930. Spent all year lying to the American people, but pretending, apparently some of them believe it, that the results of the 2024 election represented a dramatic shift in how the American people viewed the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. What have the results of the last year said about that conclusion? What have the results of Saturday night, deep in the heart of Texas, said about the Republican conclusion? That somehow we were in the midst of some dramatic MAGA makeover. It was a lie then, it's a lie today, and it certainly will be proven to be a lie in November.
Leader Jeffries was also asked about the SAVE Act.
Well, the SAVE Act is dead on arrival. It's not going anywhere in the Senate. And the Republicans have failed on the issue of immigration enforcement. These people are desperate. They've lost their advantage on every single issue that they thought was going to be part of some permanent realignment. How was it possible that they actually convinced people that there was some permanent realignment when they haven't won a race in 13 months? It's confusing to me. Their policies have failed completely. Donald Trump is deeply unpopular. Democrats have been up in the generic ballot for months. And everybody understands if the election were held today, they're going down in flames on the other side. Because Democrats are the only group of people actually focused not on partisan bills like the SAVE Act, so-called SAVE Act, but on actually making life better for the American people, driving down the high cost of living, fixing our broken healthcare system, cleaning up corruption, making it clear here in America, our view, you work hard, you play by the rules, as hundreds of millions of Americans do, you should be able to live an affordable life, a comfortable life, live the good life. That's what Democrats are fighting hard to bring about. Good paying job, good housing, good health care, good education for your children, and a good retirement.
House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries at the Capitol today. You can follow today's House Rules hearings at cspan.org and C-SPAN Now. Again, the Oversight Committee's approval of a contempt petition against former President Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton relating to the Jeffrey Epstein investigation is on the agenda at the Rules Committee. And just a few minutes ago at the committee, House Appropriations Ranking Member Rosa DeLauro announced she will support the funding package that is on the floor, the Senate-passed funding package. You can see the Rules Committee, again, C-SPAN Now and cspan.org. Now to the Senate, where government funding was on the mind of Republican leader John Thune.
We had a bipartisan agreement on the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill that included funding for de-escalation training for Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as well as both body cams for ICE officers. Nevertheless, Republicans agreed to Democrats' request for additional time to allow for additional consideration of this bill before final passage. But any conversation, Mr. President, has to include a discussion of how to make it safer for our federal law enforcement agents to effectively carry out their duties. We need to address not only issues like increased training for ICE officers, but things like preventing the constant harassment and worse that officers have faced for simply trying to do their jobs. The President's border czar, Tom Homan, recently traveled to Minneapolis at the President's request, and his efforts have gone a long way to restoring order in that city and ensuring that immigration operations can be carried out safely. One thing he's trying to accomplish is increased cooperation between local law enforcement and ICE. That's another thing, Mr. President, that Democrats should be willing to address in the coming days. It's notable how much more peaceful things have been in cities where local law enforcement has been authorized to cooperate with ICE. It's time to bring an end to the dangerous practice of local jurisdictions refusing to cooperate with federal law enforcement. So I hope there will be a set of issues like those that Senate Democrats and the administration, I should say, can find consensus around. But one thing is clear. If Democrats' goal is simply to make it harder to detain and deport dangerous illegal aliens, then they will find no interest on this side of the aisle. I hope that is not the case, because the stakes are high. Republicans provided for ICE enforcement and the working families tax cuts, but the Homeland Security bill funds a number of other critical agencies, including the TSA, the Coast Guard, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, agencies that we cannot leave behind. We need to give these agencies the security of a full-year funding bill without delay.
And government funding was also on the mind of Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer.
Right now, Americans from all walks of life, left, right, and center, agree that the status quo with ICE cannot continue and Congress needs to make a change. What's happening in Minneapolis and other cities around the country is not law and order, it's thuggery. Thuggery. Here's what former Border Control head Greg Bavino said recently in a video that circulated online. Quote, "Arrest as many people who touch you as you want. Those are general orders all the way to the very top." That is the rhetoric of police states. That is precisely the abuse that Congress needs to stop. That is why we were so intent on splitting off the Homeland Security bill from the rest of the funding bill so we could focus on it, so we could rein in ICE, and end the violence. Republicans need to take a good look at what's happening around the country and realize, too, that it's time to rein in ICE's abuses. We should be going after the worst of the worst, as the administration says, instead of unleashing fear and chaos on everybody else. What Democrats want is exceedingly reasonable. We need to end roving patrols. That means arrest warrants and ending racial profiling. Second, we need real accountability, having ICE abide by the same rules as local police do, including independent investigations of ICE. And third, masks need to come off, cameras need to stay on, officers need visible ID, no secret police. These changes are as common sense as it gets. There's nothing insane, as some Republicans think, asking federal agents to respect the Fourth Amendment. It does not criminalize law enforcement to ask them to identify themselves and follow the same basic code as other law enforcement. This idea that Johnson has, that ICE people should be able to wear masks. Police officers don't wear masks all across the country. And if anyone needs to be identified, it's these abusive thugs who are in the Border Patrol, who are in ICE. If Republicans can't come to the table on these very sensible changes, then the violence we see happening around the country is going to continue.
And just this note, in his Leader Time comments, Senator Schumer pledged unified support against the SAVE Act, saying it would be dead on arrival should it reach the Senate floor. You can watch the Senate live and on C-SPAN 2, and of course get full congressional coverage at cspan.org and the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Now to the latest on the ICE-related shootings in Minneapolis. Two federal immigration efforts who fired on Alex Priddy were publicly identified today. The websites for ProPublica and The Guardian both reviewed public Justice Department documents that contain the agents' names. The reports come after Friday's announcement that from Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche that the Justice Department has opened a civil rights investigation into the Alex Priddy shooting. This morning on C-SPAN, former federal prosecutor Anush Kadori offered his thoughts on the DOJ's investigation.
Let's just take a step back here. I mean, when that man was killed on camera, the administration for days tried to lie to the American public, even though it was on camera. They then spent a week not quite lying, but coming up with a new, very misleading theory, which was that we got to take a step back from this man who was just killed on camera by federal officials, as if we should do that. We got to take a step back and focus how the real perpetrators here are the Minnesota law enforcement who haven't done enough to help the federal government. So they tried to shift the blame for federal officials' killing of Alex Priddy onto local law enforcement, which is ridiculous. They're outnumbered, and it is not their job to enforce federal immigration law. So I think this administration has really fully, to me at least, fully depleted its credibility on this subject. If they cared about this, they would not have lied to the public, and they would have immediately began this investigation. At the same time, even based on the reporting we have about the investigation, it's not really clear that they're looking at the officers/shooters in earnest, right? They seem to have been dragged kicking and screaming to do this, much belatedly, and perhaps as a result of the political firestorm. But under the circumstances, I mean, this Justice Department has done nothing but make excuses for the administration.
In terms of an investigation, what would the normal process look like in the wake of a shooting by a federal officer? How is this different from that?
Yeah, yes. So this is not an area I specialize in, so I just want to be clear about that. But, you know, generally speaking, you would expect both state and federal law enforcement officials to be looking very closely at it, right? And you might expect state officials to go forward with the sort of support and cooperation of the federal government And the federal government tends to serve as a backstop in those sorts of cases, right? If the state can't pull it together, the state conviction maybe isn't achieved. You'll see federal officials maybe come in with a backup sort of civil rights use of force case. But that's generally how things work. This is not at all the norm, where you have the federal government taking control of the crime scene immediately, not really explaining what they're doing, not making evidence available to local authorities, right? And already out of the gate, I mean, it's really amazing. It was only a little over a week ago. Already out of the gate, we had this administration claiming that Alex Preddy was some sort of insurrectionist who was attacking and trying to kill as many law enforcement officers as he could. That was the initial claim, right? So, under the circumstances, like I think it would be ridiculous to assume that this is going to be an earnest, good faith investigation. The Civil Rights Division is led right now by Harmeet Dillon, who is, if you follow her on her Twitter account, is a political partisan and really not even fit for the job that she holds. This is not going to be an earnest investigation into Alex Preddy's death.
Former federal prosecutor Anish Kadori, he now writes for Politico magazine, this morning on C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Now, Alex Preddy's death and the investigation was also a topic at a congressional town hall over the weekend with New York Republican Representative Mike Lawler.
I believe it was entirely preventable. And I think a few things in relation to it. Number one, there needs to be a full and independent and transparent investigation with the cooperation of federal, state, and local officials. Number two, okay, there needs to be reforms. Now, I look at that in twofold. One, there are reforms in terms of the way ICE has operated. And I can tell you throughout the course of the last year, a number of my colleagues and I have met with the administration and pushed back against things that they were doing in relation to this and how they were going about executing the deportations, how they were going about. This is why, if we want to get somewhere, you need to allow an actual investigation, okay? And when you go, folks, can you let me answer the question? Thank you. So when you look at the situation in terms of how ICE has operated, I said last year, when I was asked in one of the town halls about masks, I said, no, they should not be wearing masks. And I think that is something that should be addressed. And we are going to be having negotiations over some of these issues in the next 2 weeks, with respect to what changes ICE is going to undertake. I think it was a positive step that the president sent Tom Homan and relieved Greg Bavino. And folks, Tom Homan has had a 40-year career. He was honored by President Obama for that career. And by the way, President Obama deported 3.5 million people, which is far more than President Trump. So if you're going to scream about the deportations under President Trump, you should be equally outraged. Now, when you look at the situation with respect to both Renee Good and Alex Preddy, part of the reason why I think it is imperative that people allow an investigation to take place, and why I did not agree with anybody calling either one of them domestic terrorists. I thought that was wrong. I said so publicly. Nobody should be doing that. I also believe it's wrong to call ICE the Gestapo. That is not the way to operate. It is not the way to operate. And if you want to actually address these issues, then we have to actually look at, why are we in this situation?
From a town hall in Suffern, New York, held by Republican Representative Mike Lawler over the weekend. Now, in Friday's announcement, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche gave no investigation timetable, nor did he commit to the release of body camera footage from the Alex Preddy incident. He said the department's investigation would encompass events of that day, as well as the days and weeks that preceded the shooting. You can see all of today's segment on Washington Journal with Anush Kadori and Representative Lawler's Town Hall at cspan.org and the C-SPAN Now mobile app. You're listening to Washington Today.
In September 1993, Ross Perot held a press conference on Capitol Hill. He was surrounded by members from both parties. The topic, the then secretive and mysterious discharge petition.
Well, this is a great day for our country. I am certain that the framers of the Constitution and the signers of the Declaration of Independence are looking down from heaven, smiling on this reform. For 63 years, the handful of leaders in the House of Representatives decided the agenda, not the members of the House. This was an unlikely event to occur, but it did occur because of the leadership and the courage of the people who signed that petition.
Soon after Ross Perot's 1993 press conference, the House of Representatives ended its 63-year-old tradition of secrecy surrounding discharge petitions. They became public, and so did the list of members who signed them. And that changed everything. What is a discharge petition? How does it work? And in 2026, what does it have to do with health care, with members of Congress owning stocks, and with Jeffrey Epstein? Scott Wong has answers. The NBC News senior congressional reporter joins C-SPAN's podcast, Extreme Mortman. Scott Wong explains how the discharge petition has become a game changer in Congress. Find Extreme Mortman wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today. The Washington Post reports that President Trump wants to build a 250-foot-tall arch over the Potomac River, right between the Lincoln Memorial and Arlington National Cemetery. The arch would mark the nation's 250th anniversary. The Post reports the project's concept is much bigger than was initially expected, and that some architectural experts think it will distort the size of the surrounding memorials in the area. White House Communications Director Stephen Chung said on social media, the, quote, experts who think it's too big are used to living with things being small. The Post also reporting today that the president announced a 2-year closure of the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts for, quote, a complete rebuilding. The president said the venue will close starting July 4th of this year. That's the same day as the U.S.'s 250th anniversary. He said the rebuilding plan is subject to the approval of the center's board. Of course, the president is the chair of that board. Members of the Kennedy family responded to the news on social media today. President Kennedy's grandson, Jack Schlossberg, posted, quote, while Trump can take over the institution, my grandfather's legacy will endure. JFK is kept alive by us now rising up to remove Donald Trump, bring him to justice, and restore the freedoms generations fought for. Former Massachusetts Democratic Representative Joe Kennedy, who is Robert F. Kennedy's grandson, called the president's decision, quote, painful. He added that the center was built by and for the people as a shared point of connection. Now, President Trump himself appeared on the Dan Bongino podcast today, and Politico, writing about the appearance, quote, President Trump said that Republicans should nationalize elections, continuing to double down on false conspiracy theories about widespread voter fraud in the 2020 presidential election. Politico went on to write, the suggestion, of course, runs contrary to the U.S. Constitution, which delegates election administration to the states, and it comes less than a week after the FBI raided an elections office outside Atlanta where they seized ballots and other voting records from the 2020 election. Now, on today's podcast, the president tied the reason to nationalize elections to illegal immigration.
The people that came in, they don't work, and they don't want them either because they don't want to pay welfare. So they've sent all of their people, millions and millions of people. We have to get them out. And by the way, if Republicans don't get them out, you will never win another election as a Republican. If you don't get these people are all pitted, so they vote. And they make all this crap with the voting. Oh, well, you can vote, you can do whatever you want. It's crazy. I mean, it's crazy how you can get these people to vote. And if we don't get them out, Republicans will never win another election. Think of it. I won in a landslide. I won every swing state. I won the popular vote by millions. I won everything. I won a thing called counties. The counties I won, it's such a big vote. That's why the map was entirely red when you looked at it. It had two little purple lines and two blue lines on each side, but it was all red. And counties I won by 2,750. Think of this, to 550. 2,000 750 to 550. It's becoming a very good count because it's accurate. It covers the whole country. It's like a landslide. But you're never going to have that again if you don't get these people out. These people were brought to our country to vote, and they vote illegally. And amazing that the Republicans aren't tougher on it. The Republicans should say, we want to take over. We should take over the voting in at least 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting. And we have states that are so crooked, and they're counting votes. We have states that I won that show I didn't win. Now you're going to see something in Georgia where they were able to get, with a court order, the ballots. You're going to see some interesting things come out. But, like the 2020 election, I won that election by so much. Everybody does it. They put a woman in jail, Colorado, put a woman in jail, a wonderful woman, 72 years old, had cancer, because she was a voting inspector. She was in charge of a voting area, and she saw boxes of votes come in. So she went over to check it, and they put her in jail for voter manipulation, and she's still in jail. And they better let her out fast.
That from the Dan Bongino podcast. Of course, Dan Bongino, the now former assistant FBI director. Before that, he was a podcaster. Now that he's left the FBI, he relaunched his podcast today. And more administration news today. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced that his department will devote $100 million toward a pilot program addressing homelessness and substance abuse in 8 cities. The program builds on an executive order President Trump signed last week related to addiction. HHS spokesperson Andrew Nixon told the Associated Press that the department is, quote, focused on reform and ensuring that federal resources are used effectively, responsibly, and in ways that deliver real results for those struggling and their families. Here's more from Secretary Kennedy.
Ultimately, what we have to do at HHS over the next 3 years is do everything we can to switch the model at CMMI and CMS and HRSA and SAMHSA to coordinate response so that somebody is in charge of that addict. Somebody is accountable as he moves through the system. And to move to outcome-based services where people have an incentive to make sure you don't relapse, that there's a strong economic incentive. You get paid one price for treating that individual, then you follow that individual for 3 years, and you're responsible for all the costs. That will bring down the cost, because then people will look. We have lots of evidence-based treatments. We know what works. We're not doing it well because nobody has an incentive to do that, and so there's no accountability.
AP reports that HHS will also make faith-based organizations eligible for addiction-related grants. It will also help states use federal health funding for substance abuse treatment in certain situations involving children. You can see all of today's event at cspan.org and the C-SPAN Now mobile app. And from FloridaToday.com, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth delivered a campaign-style speech to Blue Origin's rocket factory workforce on Merritt Island. He spoke from a podium at the huge bay doors of the company's sprawling Rocket Park manufacturing facility.
Rebuilding our military. That's why we're on the Arsenal of Freedom tour. That's why we're here in Florida. We're going across the country for a couple of months, talking to industry, large like this one, and small. We need all of them. And we need you to move fast, at scale, at cost, to outcompete our adversaries, to rebuild our arsenal of freedom. President Trump did it in his first term, and we're doing it again. As you may have heard, the One Big Beautiful Bill provided the War Department a historic down payment of $150 billion to supercharge President Trump's defense capabilities. He has announced the goal to spend $1.5 trillion for our national defense in 2027. That is a massive message to the rest of the world that American strength is not going anywhere anytime soon. We will dominate in every domain.
FloridaToday.com goes on to write, Blue Origin is developing new Glenn rockets and lunar landers for future Artemis missions. Blue Origin's founder, Jeff Bezos, also spoke at today's event. You can see all of it on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and at cspan.org. Also today in Florida, a critical test for NASA's Artemis II mission to the moon. It's known as a wet dress rehearsal. Space.com describes today's tests as essentially an elaborate launch day walkthrough where NASA's engineers will fully fuel the Space Launch System rocket, then go through each step as it would on the actual day of liftoff up until roughly 30 seconds before the liftoff would happen. If all goes well, NASA could announce a real liftoff date for Artemis 2. If issues crop up, the launch could be delayed. And today's events in Florida coincide with a sad day in American history. 23 years ago, yesterday, the Space Shuttle Columbia broke apart as it re-entered Earth's atmosphere on its way back from a 16-day science mission. The cause? Damage to the heat-resistant tiles covering the leading edge of the shuttle's left wing that caused the ship to break apart. The first debris began falling to the ground in West Texas near Lubbock at 8:58 a.m. Central Time on February 1st, eventually scattering across more than 2,000 locations across East Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana. And from the C-SPAN video library, part of President George W. Bush's speech at a memorial service for the crew at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
In your grief, you are responding as your friends would have wished, with focus, professionalism, and unbroken faith in the mission of this agency. Captain Brown was correct. America's space program will go on. This cause of exploration and discovery is not an option we choose. It is a desire written in the human heart. We are that part of creation which seeks to understand all creation. We find the best among us, send them forth into unmapped darkness, and pray they will return. They go in peace for all mankind, and all mankind is in their debt. Yet some explorers do not return, and the law settles unfairly on a few. The families here today shared in the courage of those they loved. But now they must face life and grief without them. The sorrow is lonely, but you are not alone. In time, you will find comfort and the grace to see you through. And in God's own time, we can pray that the day of your reunion will come.
From February 4th, 2003, President George W. Bush had a memorial service honoring the Columbia astronauts, the 23rd anniversary of the Columbia disaster yesterday on February 1st. NASA's post-accident investigation concluded that organizational failures at the organization, not just technical flaws, contributed to the tragedy. The findings led to a reorganization of the agency's safety culture and future missions. The shuttle program stayed grounded until Discovery launched to deliver supplies to the International Space Station. That happened on July 16th, 2005. You can see all of President Bush's speech from that day and more about Columbia and the shuttle program at cspan.org and the C-SPAN Now mobile app. That's also where you can find this program as a podcast, and it's on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And a reminder, the C-SPAN networks are now available on YouTube TV. To learn more, go to tv.youtube.com. And if you want more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day, get our daily email word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.